Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. In this video, I wanted to go over the year 1966 in music. And this is because on my channel, we've been going through our top 10 favorite albums per year, starting with 1960. And last month we did our 1965. Me and Nick did our top 10 albums from 60 to 64. And then Briar from Briar's Music Showcase joined us at 65. So hopefully you guys have been enjoying those. Those have been a lot of fun. I've been having a lot of fun going through all the many albums to try to come up with the top 10. And just say, yeah, and so each time we'd go through a top 10, I usually like to also go through what happened in the year of that year. You know, what were the major events in music? Also, I like to talk about what are the top 10 best-selling albums that year and what were the 5 Grammy-nominated albums of the year. You know, just kind of give an overall view of what it looked like to be 1966. So usually I do that on those videos, but of course those videos are taking quite a long time. Now there's 3 of us doing our own top 10, me doing all the, all the history and all that, and then us doing the top 10s. Definitely making those live streams pretty long. We're planning on doing that hopefully next week, doing our top 10 favorite albums of 1966. So I thought I'd do a separate video here and talk about what major events happened in 1966 and kind of talk about 66 as a whole and all that. Anyway, so yeah, of course, no, you know that I just love the 1960s in music. I'm trying to think of the word. There's no surprise that this is definitely one of the best years in music. I say up to this point, this is the best year of music, 1966. One of the most incredible years. There's so many albums that I absolutely love coming out of this year. It was really, 65 didn't seem like a groundbreaking year for music when things were starting to really change. And we're still seeing that in 66, I think. Bands are just putting out some of their best albums of all time in this year, in my opinion. And we're definitely still getting we had the British invasion coming in 64, 65. 66, I don't know if we're having as much of a British invasion anymore. The ones that have already come over in those 2 years are still making great records. And we still got the folk rock also, but folk rock's not as big now. I think it was in 65 was the big year for folk rock. Though we still get some of those folk rock albums in this year as well. And some of those bands are still going on, like the Byrds and so forth. And we're going to see some new ones come out this year as well. Yeah, so folk rock's still a big thing, I think. British Invasion's still there, though I don't think any really new bands coming out. Just the ones that came out already are just getting better and better, I think. I think we're getting to a point, like I said, where albums are really been changed to where bands are starting to write their own music now, and they're really putting together their just best collection of songs, or they're trying to come up with albums with themes to them, I think, and trying to make an album a thing, not just before this point, it was, let's just buy the singles and then, the album has, maybe a couple songs that are good and we just put out a bunch of songs together and, we don't really care kind of thing. And the singles were more a bigger deal. Now the albums are becoming more a bigger deal where they're a work of art basically. And definitely putting more in there. Of course, a lot more studio inventions are happening and a lot more we can do. There's a lot more experimentation. When I'm talking about, the rock music scene, I guess, definitely more experimentation there. We're getting into psychedelic. This is kind of the first year of psychedelic music. We're going to get some more psychedelic albums this year as well. And So yeah, the music scene definitely is changing. I think the guitars are sounding heavier. When you even from 65, 66, you can kind of tell just the sound of guitars are just different. Anyways, we're getting a little more harder rock type music in some senses as well. As you see, as we talked about on my channel before. Anyway, so yeah, so a lot going on in 66. We're getting some of the best albums of all time, some classic albums coming out this year. But let's talk about kind of major events that I kind of looked up and kind of wanted to talk about here on the channel. Starting in January 14th of 1966, we have a name change. David Jones decides he needs to change his last name to Bowie. Yeah, so this is where we get David Bowie. David Bowie's original name was David Jones, which is so funny. Because there's another famous David Jones, that's coming out this year as well. A member of the Monkees, which is a new band forming this year, which I'll talk about here. Anyway, so funny that we got David Jones is also kind of like the most heartthrob. All the teenage girls love David Jones. It's such a cute guy, kind of thing. So interesting that now we got David Bowie having changed his name because of that. March 4th, of course, I love talking about Beatles history here, but March 4th was a kind of a infamous moment in Beatles history where John Lennon, in an interview, he says the line, "The Beatles are more popular than Jesus," and that becomes a huge scandal, not scandal, but controversy amongst fans, mostly in the United States. In fact, it's funny, I think he did this interview and nobody really talked about it. It wasn't that big of a deal at the time when but then somebody from the United States, I think, caught hold of it. And I think we have the Bible Belt in America, which is kind of the Midwest, South part of America, very religious. And so I think because America has all this religious, I would say more religious than, like England is, as far as that's concerned. They got hold of this, what? John thinks they're more popular than Jesus? And they started burning records and mounting protests, and all that. And John Lennon was kind of forced to apologize for his statements, which he says to clarify, like, I'm not saying we're better than Jesus. I'm just saying we're very popular right now. Anyway, so it's one of those things, I don't know if it was that big of a deal, but it was a little bit of a controversy that happened there. In April of 1966, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass Band would set a world record by placing 5 albums in the pop charts. 5 albums, which is crazy. They came out 5 albums in 1966. That's a lot of albums, but all of them charted. That's the first time that many albums have charted in the pop charts. 4 of them were in the top 10 when they charted. Anyway, so this made Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass Band the best-selling group in 1966. When you think 1966, I never think of Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass Band. Some of you might not even know who they are. I really don't know who they are, except they keep coming on these lists that I do research. They're very, very popular at this time, and they make it on a lot of Grammys. They won it, or no, they've been getting nominated for Grammys anyways, and being best-selling albums, all this. And I don't know much about them except they're a musical band, instrumental band. I don't know if they do jazz maybe or something, whatever. But yeah, also very, very popular, outselling even the Beatles. Of course, Beatles only put out 1 album this year. The Beach Boys, all these, bands you think of. No, Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass Band, they were the big, winners of this year, I guess. But I don't know much about them. If anybody knows about them, you can comment in the comments. Anyways, but on April 12th, we have a bit of a tragedy that happens. Jan Berry of Jan and Dean, the duo group, he crashes his Corvette in a truck, or against a truck or something like that. Anyways, he survives it though, but he goes in a coma for 2 months, and he has total physical paralysis for over a year, and he has extensive brain damage. Yeah, so Jan has to live with that, I guess, for the rest of his life. So it could have been worse, I guess. He could have died, but still pretty bad. We've been seeing that a lot. It seems like every year something tragic like this happens to somebody anyways. But May 7th, we have the song Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones, one of their most popular songs of all time. Comes the first #1 hit that uses the sitar. not the first one to use a sitar, but they made a #1 hit using that instrument, which kind of starts getting more well used. It gets used on Revolver by the Beatles. First time I know that was kind of used was on Rubber Soul by the Beatles with the Norwegian Wood. There's a little bit of a sitar in there. We're going to see a lot more sitar with George Harrison with the Beatles. Loves using sitar quite a bit. Anyway, so it's definitely one of those things where we're getting the Eastern religious, or Eastern, influences, I guess at this point, Indian influences, especially in the music industry, because we'll see a lot of Hinduism coming in and all this. Anyway, so that's part of that. But anyways, another tragic kind of thing that happened, June 6th of 1966, Roy Orbison's wife dies in a motorcycle wreck. Yeah, so very sad news for Roy Orbison at this point. He was making a lot of big records at this time, one of the biggest artists at this moment. Yeah, I know he had some more tragedy happens later in his life. I haven't looked up all his life, but I know my friend Adam from What the Gym is a big fan of Roy Orbison. I think he said that he had some other really tragic things happen to him, but this is one of them. I mean, it's a very sad thing to happen. June 18th, we have Jimmy Page replaces Paul Smith on the bass for the Yardbirds. So we have the Jimmy Page joining the Yardbirds as a bass player, which kind of surprised me. I had no idea that he came in as a bass player. Of course, he would eventually move up to I wouldn't say move up to, he'd move on to a different instrument, the lead guitar, and became well known as one of the greatest lead guitar players of all time. So it's kind of interesting. I think at this point he was just a session player. I know he played a session in Abbey Roads a lot on different albums, and I know in '64 he played on the Goldfinger soundtrack, I believe, of the James Bond movie, very famous James Bond movie. And so it's kind of cool. He wasn't in a band or anything, and I guess this Paul Smith, I don't know, left the group, and so there was a job opening, and Jimmy Page took it, and boy, history was made at that point. Of course, Jimmy Page, I mean, and the Yardbirds are known for their guitar players. I mean, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page now. The Yardbirds would eventually kind of change into Led Zeppelin, who goes on to be one of the biggest selling rock groups of all time. And Jimmy Page is kind of considered one of the greatest rock guitarists. So interesting. This is where he gets to start here. On July 2nd, more Beatle news here. The Beatles become the first band to perform at the Nippon Budokan Hall in Japan, if I'm pronouncing that right. And this was a big deal because that was like a very you didn't use it for rock concerts. It's a very sacred kind of, almost, some felt like it was kind of a sacred place. That wasn't, and there was protests that they didn't want the Beatles to be there. But it is a pretty good concert. I've seen on YouTube. It's kind of cool because it's like, again, this is, and I'll get to this, this is the last year that we're going to see the Beatles tour, and they would go over to Asia for the first time, including Japan and then the Philippines as well. But this is like the only time you're going to see some songs from, I think, Rubber Soul played in concert, because they didn't really play much from the Rubber Soul era, because then they would stop touring at this point. They never played anything off Revolver, but it's kind of cool to hear. I think they played like Nowhere Man, If I Needed Someone. I think they maybe even played Paperback Writer, which was a single that came out this year. So you get to see some of those. Those are the only times you ever see those live performances. Anyways, overall, it seemed like a pretty cool concert. July 29th, Bob Dylan, he gets injured in a motorcycle wreck. He survives, but he's injured pretty badly. He then is not seen in public for a year, so probably almost died, I'm sure, of this motorcycle accident. I know later he would then convert to Christianity, and he'd have a bit of a era where he was had these Christian albums, and he became a big deal about Christianity and stuff like that, and talking about it on stage and all that. And always felt like it was probably from this moment, he had this little almost died moment, and sometimes when you have those moments, you have a come to Jesus moment, as you say. And I think that probably happened around this time. That'd be my guess. But yeah, so didn't appear in concert or anything. I'm sure, healing from this big motorcycle accident. But luckily he survived, go on to make more albums. July 31st, we have the supergroup Cream will play for the first time in concert. Yeah, so this is we call it supergroup because you have Eric Clapton, who, of course, like I said, played with like the Yardbirds. He played with some other groups. I'm gonna forget the other guy. Ginger Baker, I know, is the drummer. I'm not sure where he came from. And then the other guy is Jack something. I'm forgetting now on top of my mind. But anyways, one of the great like trio rock groups that definitely one of the mainstays of the beginners of the psychedelic rock and hard rock era. And some absolute incredible guitar riffs and of course bass, and Ginger Baker is one of the greatest drummers as well. And Clapton, with the Sunshine of Your Love, creating one of the greatest riffs. Anyways, so yeah, so here we're getting Cream first in concert, and they would last, I forget, only like 4 or 5 albums, I think, before they would break up. August 29th, we have the Beatles perform the last concert at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, I believe it is. Yeah, so this is the moment. Like they went to Japan, they went to the Philippines, had a horrible time in the Philippines, barely got out of there, seemed like alive, and they weren't very happy with all that. And touring was not that fun anymore for them. They're getting kind of tired of it, and they're starting to, get married and have families at this point. Some of them, anyways. And then the danger aspect, it felt like they're putting themselves in danger, like in the Philippines and stuff like that. And also, just you couldn't hear anybody singing because the girls were screaming. So I don't know, it just kind of came too much for them, and they decided they're just hang it up and just do studio work at this point. So yeah, big deal though, because the Beatles were the biggest band in the world. Their tours were the biggest tours in the world. Their concerts were the biggest concerts. In '65, I believe they played at Shea Stadium, which was the biggest concert of all time, I think, at that point. So yeah, pretty big deal. They would no longer play live anymore. All right, September 12th, we get the debut episode of the TV show The Monkees. Yeah, here we get The Monkees, which it's funny. As a kid, I used to watch The Monkees TV show, and I used to listen to The Monkees music on the radio. Coming up, I guess I didn't realize until later that they were first kind of auditioned for the TV show, and then they were put together as a band on the TV show. I thought they were just a band that was popular, and then they made a TV show about them or something like that. But no, they actually weren't a thing until the TV show kind of came around and auditioned certain people, brought them together. And I'm not going to remember everybody's name, but like I said, Davy Jones is in there. Oh gosh, I'm not going to remember anybody's name now. Peter, I know there's a Peter in there. Mickey, I believe, and there's Mike Nesmith. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting all their names at the moment, but yeah, they would make this TV show and put out music, though a lot of the music was written by other people, like Neil Diamond, for instance. And there's feelings that they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because I think there's a feeling of they're just, not a real band. They're just a TV show. But I've listened to some of their albums now, and they have some good albums. There's a couple albums I've heard now that I think are really good. So I'm like, they should be in the Hall of Fame. They made some really good music. But yeah, this week, and the Monkees are kind of almost like a Beatles. I think they were trying to make a Beatles-like band and write Beatles-like music, and it worked really well because they had the good look, and the music was really catchy, and so it all worked together pretty well for them. I'm not sure how long they lasted as a TV show. I have to wonder, but October 22nd, the Supremes, A Go-Go, the Supremes album, makes the Supremes the first female group to reach #1. So first time we had an all-female group reach #1 in the charts. Supremes, A Go-Go was a huge album, probably their best album. I think it had like 4 #1 hits on it. I mean, Supremes were definitely one of the biggest groups at this point, selling a lot of records. And Motown was doing very well as well, as we'll see in even the next year. Supremes, Temptation, the Four Tops, all doing really well during this time period. The last bit of news we'll talk about is some more Beatles kind of news anyways. And November 9th, John Lennon will meet Yoko Ono. And say what you will, maybe it was a bad case. I kind of wish he never met Yoko Ono personally, but then again, I shouldn't say that because I know they had a kid together and all that. But I don't know, some like Yoko, some don't. I've never been a big fan of Yoko myself. But yeah, this is a big, I don't know what to say. Like in the Beatles, I mean, Yoko becomes a big part of the last part of the groups, before they break up. And John and Yoko is kind of forever this, couple that we all think about. Anytime we think about a group breaking up, we always think, oh, it's the Yoko Ono kind of effect of, one of the band members gets a girlfriend who then puts a riff in for the rest of the band. Not to say Yoko Ono broke up the band, but just saying she did cause some problems when she joined in, and she was always there at the rehearsals and the recordings and giving her opinion, and nobody really wanted it, all that kind of stuff. And so now we always get that now. Anytime somebody gets a girlfriend, it's like, oh no, is this a Yoko Ono thing? But yeah, so this is a big deal because then they would fall in love. John would divorce Cynthia and then marry Yoko. Of course, that's, not too long after this. And they would have, all those, peace in bed kind of protest stuff, very hippie stuff going on. She definitely was very avant-garde, kind of weird art person that she would kind of, and John Lennon liked art, so I think they probably, connected on that. And yeah, and she's one of the worst singers probably ever live. The screeching of Yoko Ono is just something else. But yeah, they would go on, of course, and be married for the rest of John's life, of course, until he passed away. And Yoko's still alive today, still, champion John Lennon's music and all that. But anyway, so yeah, that's definitely, they've been at an art, by the way, and I've been there. I was in London. I've seen the place, the Inca, I think, art, something rather, Indigo or something. I don't know. I remember I have a picture of it, like where they met at an art gallery thing, and she had an art thing where she wrote on the ceiling the word yes, and you had to climb up a ladder and take a magnifying glass in order to see the word yes. And so John was there and he saw that and he liked it, I guess. He was like, oh, that was a very positive thing. And that's how he met Yoko anyway. So it's always an interesting story. Infamous couple, John and Yoko. Anyway, so that's kind of the news stories that happened, the events that happened in 1966. Then I want to talk about some of the new artists that kind of came out that would be, influential, would be a big deal in music. We have the debuts of the Monkees, as I mentioned, with their first album, I believe it's called The Monkees. We have Buffalo Springfield, a band that I really enjoy, come out with their debut, Buffalo Springfield, where we get Stephen Stills and Neil Young playing together the first time. And they had a huge hit, of course, with, what's it called? No, I'm not going to remember it. I have the record. I probably look at it if I find it. For What It's Worth, yeah, that's it. For What It's Worth. All right, yeah, For What It's Worth comes a huge hit for them anyways. This year, as I mentioned, Cream debuted this year as well. We have the Grassroots, I don't know, American kind of rock band, I would say. And they had a couple of big hits during this time period. Iron Butterfly, which I don't know much about, but I think they'll be a big deal later on. The Mamas and Papas. Mamas and Papas, obviously a huge group. Again, I think they had like 2 albums come out this year. The Mamas and Papas and If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears were 2 big albums. Of course, their big song, California Dreaming, Monday were huge. Kind of in that folk rock style of music. And we also have Jefferson Airplane, which is interesting. Their first album is not a really psychedelic rock album. It's more a folk rock album. It's decent. It won't be till like I think the next year that they get the Cervistic Pillow, which is like a very super psychedelic, and definitely we're getting more psychedelic the next year. And also Grace Slick isn't in the group yet at this point. She didn't come on to like the next year. But yeah, Jefferson Airplane comes in here and they'll be pretty influential in the psychedelic rock movement at that time period. So those are the new bands. So then I want to talk about what were the top 10 selling albums of 1966. All right, best-selling album, no surprise here. The Beatles have been hugely popular. They've been the number 1 or number 2 like every year from 64 to now. In fact, the last 2 years I was doing this list, they had like 5 albums in the top 10. So that's how great they're selling. This time we got Revolver at number 1. No surprise, Revolver is one of the biggest albums of theirs all time. And like I said, their albums are all now that their albums are in America And Revolver is an album that's in America and Great Britain at the same time, though there's slightly different song arrangements on there, or different songs. There's a couple different songs on them, but anyway, Revolver is definitely one of the most popular albums of all time. Number 2 is The Monkees by the Monkees. As I said, the Monkees trying to be like the Beatles, and here they are at number 2. They had a number 1, I believe. Yeah, the Monkees album was the number 1 album for them as well. Even though, in my opinion, it's not that great of an album. It has like The Last Train to Clarksville is like their big hit, I believe, on this album. But yeah, so yeah, Monkees, very, very popular. And the 3rd spot, we got Sounds of Silence by Simon Garfunkel. Yeah, so Simon Garfunkel, their 2nd album. Their first album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., actually made it like at the 10th spot. I don't know if that was 64, I believe. I don't think they made anything, 65, because they broke up as a group. I've said this before, but it's such an interesting story. Simon and Garfunkel broke up after the first album because they didn't feel like the first album did very well. Simon goes to England and he comes out with his own, and I don't know if it was the 65. Yeah, he comes out with his own album, the Paul Simon Songbook, which didn't really do anything, but has some songs on there that will appear on this album. Garfunkel's in New York, I think, going to college or whatever. The producer would take the Sound of Silence which is an acoustic song from Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., put some electric guitar and bass and drums behind it, puts it back out, it becomes a number 1 hit. And so he brings Simon and Garfunkel back together and says, hey, you got a number 1 hit on your hands, good time to make an album. So that's why they make the Sounds of Silence. It becomes a big hit for them. Of course, like I said, the title song is number 1 hit for them. They also put out I Am a Rock, which is another pretty good hit for them as well. Also, like I said, some of the songs, like Kathy's song is a great song that comes off of the Paul Simon Songbook, and April Come She Will came off of the Paul Simon Songbook, and that comes in this album as well. Anyways, but good album. Number 4, we got Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme by Simon Garfunkel. Another amazing Simon Garfunkel album. So Simon Garfunkel, 2 albums in the top 5, the 2 albums they came out with. So definitely this was a big period for Simon Garfunkel. Like I said, they currently weren't anything. They made one album in 64, didn't do that well. It didn't seem like 65, they didn't do anything. 66, 2 big albums. So definitely becoming one of the biggest groups of this time period, the biggest duo of all time. Of course, like I said, this album has like Scarborough Fair, Homeward Bound is a huge hit for them, Feeling Groovy. So I mean, they had like 3 big hits off this album as well. Number 5, we got Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan. Yeah, Bob Dylan coming back with another big album. I said last year, Highway 61 Revisited, all 3 of us had in our top 10 favorite albums of that year. And I've been a big fan of even 64. He had 2 albums I absolutely loved. And so he's not done yet. Here he comes with Blonde on Blonde, which is considered one of his biggest hit albums of all time. Again, here sold very well. The double album, I don't know if it's the first double album he did, but yeah, lots of music on there. I'm trying to think what the big hit is. It's I can't think what it's called, but the one where he sings really fast. It's kind of a fun song. And I'm sure he has some other big ones on here. I'm not remembering at the moment. I do have the album somewhere here. Number 6, we get a compilation album here. We get big hits, High Tide and Green Grass by the Rolling Stones, and in 66, the Rolling Stones also put Aftermath this year, which is kind of their first big album where it's all original songs. Like I said, most bands have a lot of cover songs. We're seeing albums come out where bands are like, hey, the Beatles are putting out originals, like, Hard Day's Night, and then Revolver this year, and Rubber Soul last year in 65. It's like, hey, let's try to write our own music and put it out. And that's what we get here. I mean, that's what we do get with Aftermath for Rolling Stones. But they have a greatest hits that does even better, which is interesting because they've only been around for a couple of years and they already have a greatest hits album. That's odd to me, but because their best songs are yet to come, it seems like. Number 7, we got Yesterday and Today by the Beatles. This is an American album, of course. I'm not super familiar with it. I don't have this one, of course, because it's an American and it's a little bit harder to get by. But from what I heard from my friends, this is like the best American album the Beatles ever put out. And I looked at the set list and it's amazing. It definitely would be an amazing album to get. Also, he has the song Yesterday in it. Has the songs from Revolver and it has a couple of songs from Revolver even on the album, and songs on Rubber Soul like Nowhere Man I think is on here. And yeah, so some absolutely amazing stuff. It definitely looks like a really good album. So Beatles get 2 albums in the top 10, one American, one British American. Number 8, another interesting compilation album. We get The Best of the Beach Boys by the Beach Boys. And the Beach Boys put out Pet Sounds, which is their biggest album of all time. But yet they have a compilation, a best of, that does even better in sales. Again, they've been around since '62, so it's like 4 years, and they got a best of. That seems like a cash grab, but it worked. It made a lot of money. It's number 8 on the list. Number 9, we get another Greatest Hits album. That is Greatest Hits by the Temptations. Temptations put out some really good stuff at this point. But again, Temptations really haven't been around that long, so it's weird that we're already getting Greatest Hits. But that's how popular they are. Probably the most popular Motown group at this point. And then to end the top 10, we got Pet Sounds from the Beach Boys. So Beach Boys did get their huge album Pet Sounds, which is weird because I know the big thing about Pet Sounds is the whole thing, as I heard, is that it didn't really sell as well as they wanted to. And so and it was all this kind of like, Brian Wilson was going, he wasn't doing surf rock. He was doing this whole completely different type of music, and maybe we should go back to surf rock music because that sells better. And Pet Sounds was kind of the experimental album that didn't sell very well, but still made top 10. It was number 10 best-selling album here. So I don't know what their complaints are, and of course it's considered by everybody to be one of the greatest albums of all time by any list you'll ever see. So, but Beach Boys get a compilation album and Pet Sounds in here. All right, then I'll end the video talking about Grammy Album of the Year. And I always criticize the Grammys. Grammys always give the Grammy to someone like, who cares? This person's old news. And they still haven't quite rewarded the great bands of the day. And this is the same thing. So in a year that you have Revolver, Pet Sounds, Blonde on Blonde, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, Aftermath, some absolutely incredible albums that are considered some of the best of all time, and some of the most influential albums of all time. Did one of them win Album of the Year? Of course not. Who wins? Old Blue Eyes again. Frank Sinatra's A Man and His Music wins Album of the Year, and I believe he won the year before. So this is 2 years in a row Frank Sinatra wins over all the big bands of the period and big artists of the period. And Frank Sinatra, he's a big artist, sure, but this is 1966, it's not 1956, But again, the Grammys love Frank Sinatra, so this is the 3rd Grammy of Album of the Year. That's how much they love Frank Sinatra. Nothing against Sinatra, like I said, he's a big name, but come on, you can't tell me A Man His Music is better than Revolver or Pet Sounds or Blonde on Blonde or Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. Those should be nominated for Grammy Album of the Year, not Frank Sinatra. I'm sorry. It's just like, this is 66. It's like, let's move on to somebody else besides Frank Sinatra. Because nobody talks about that. As far as I know, nobody talks about that album. All right, another album that got nominated for Grammy Album of the Year was Color Me Barbara by Barbra Streisand. Again, Barbra Streisand, very popular. She won Album of the Year a couple years ago. And here she gets nominated again. This is like her 3rd nomination or something like that. Yeah, Grammys love Barbra Streisand at this point. Another album, a 3rd album that gets nominated, is Dr. Zhivago Soundtrack by Maurice Jarre. Again, there's always a soundtrack, like Sound of Music, Fiddler on the Roof, West Side Story, those all always get nominated. They don't win, but they always get nominated. They're the big soundtrack of the day. 4th album, here we go, Revolver by the Beatles. Yes, the Beatles get nominated. I believe they got nominated. Yeah, they got nominated in '65 for Help. And so this is their 2nd year in a row they got nominated for Best Album of the Year. But 2nd year in a row, they lose out to Frank Sinatra, I believe. What are they doing, Frank? How are you beating the Beatles? Beatles are putting out 2 of their biggest albums of all time, and you get beat by Frank Sinatra. It's not fair. It's just stupid and not fair. The Grammys are a stupid organization, in my opinion. And then the last album to get nominated is What Now My Love by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. As I said, they were the biggest band of the year. They had 5 albums that charted. And so no surprise they got one that got Grammy Album of the Year, and I'm surprised they didn't win. We're going to see things change. Next year, they're starting to get with it. Let's start giving it Grammys to bands and artists that are popular at that time anyway. So, or the newer artists, I say, that are popular at that time amongst the younger crowd. Frank Sinatra is probably pretty popular amongst the older people, but the younger people, I'm sure, aren't listening to Frank Sinatra or Barbra Streisand, but that's my guess at it. Anyway, so those are kind of the events and what was going on in 66. Hopefully you get kind of an idea of what was the big music at the time, what was hitting, what new groups were coming out, and what albums were very popular. Anyway, so stay tuned as we do our top 10 favorite albums of 66 this next week. Tune in to see what we thought were the 10 best albums and see if we agree or not. Anyways, besides that, thanks for watching this video. Comment what you think about 1966, what's your best what's your favorite albums, any of that. Love to read it. Anyways, besides that, thanks for watching the video. Thank you for liking it, and thank you to all my subscribers for supporting the channel. I appreciate you all and hope you have a good day.